You diss some people in the new single.
Here's the thing. This is the kind of the way that I see it, and the way that I've always said it is it's kind of like these aren't personal attacks on people. I've never met these people. You know what I mean? So these aren't like personal attacks on their character or anything like that.
Eminem may be one of the most feared lyricists alive, but behind the fame, awards, and legendary status lies a hidden list of rappers he absolutely hated, names he never forgave, and rivalries that went way beyond music. These weren't casual disagreements, they were explosive betrayals, public humiliations, and personal attacks that pushed Slim Shady to his breaking point. From underground sabotage to family insults and career-shattering diss tracks, these 5 names reveal the darkest, pettiest, and most dangerous side of Eminem. The side only a few rappers were reckless enough to awaken. Number 5. Cannabis. Back in the late 90s, long before Eminem became a global phenomenon with platinum plaques stacked like bricks in a vault, the underground rap world was buzzing with a kind of electricity only hip-hop purists understood. It wasn't chart toppers or polished radio singles that got people talking. It was raw lyricism, hunger, and the type of technical skill that made other rappers nervous. And in that ecosystem, 2 names were starting to echo through the circuits: Slim Shady and Cannabis. To the true heads, Cannabis wasn't just respected, he was feared. He was the kind of MC who could walk into any cipher and dismantle half the room with a single verse. Wordplay, metaphors, aggression, he had all the tools. Eminem, still clawing his way through Detroit battles and trying to catch a break, admired that. He studied rappers like Cannabis the way a young boxer studies champions on grainy VHS tapes. But admiration, especially in hip-hop, can flip into resentment with one misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding would turn into one of Eminem's earliest, longest-lasting grudges. The spark that lit the fuse? LL Cool J. Or more specifically, the feud between LL and Cannabis, one of the most dissected lyrical conflicts of the era. The story goes like this. LL and Cannabis collaborated on the remix for 4, 3, 2, 1. Cannabis wrote a line about borrowing LL's tattoo idea, a line he intended as respect, not disrespect. LL, old school and fiercely protective of his status, took it the wrong way. What followed was a chain reaction of rewrites, diss tracks, and public jabs. In the middle of all this chaos, a rumor surfaced, one that claimed Eminem had ghostwritten for L or secretly taken LL's side. Whether it was a misunderstanding, a misquote, or just hip-hop gossip snowballing out of control, it landed exactly where rumors always land, in the worst possible place. Cannabis believed it. For Eminem, who had barely set foot in the mainstream, being accused of ghostwriting for a legend like LL Cool J wasn't a compliment. It was a headache wrapped in drama. M didn't have the power, the connections, or the status to defend himself properly. He was still fighting for a record deal, still working jobs to survive, still dealing with personal demons that would later inspire half his catalog. The last thing he needed was another rapper, especially one he respected, painting him as a snake. And the thing about Eminem, even in his early days, was simple. If you crossed him when he had nothing, he never forgot it when he finally had something. The tension didn't explode right away. For a while, it lived in the shadows. Small jabs, indirect lines, interviews with carefully chosen words. But when Eminem signed with Dr. Dre and suddenly went from nobody to one of the fastest rising stars in hip-hop history, the quiet feud shifted into a new gear. Cannabis, known for his sharp tongue and unfiltered confidence, released tracks throwing shade toward M, framing him as an industry creation rather than a battle-tested MC. To Cannabis, Eminem was benefiting from a machine, Dre's machine. To Eminem, that was the ultimate insult. He'd grown up in battles, competed in clubs where people booed you if you messed up one bar, and survived Detroit's unforgiving rap gauntlet. Being told he didn't earn his place was gasoline on a fire that was already burning. When Eminem finally responded, he didn't just respond like a rapper. He responded like a man who'd been waiting years for the right moment to settle a score. In freestyle after freestyle, Album after album, he dropped lines aimed straight at cannabis, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp enough to leave bruises. And while Eminem was riding a wave of commercial success few artists ever reach, cannabis was struggling through label issues, creative conflicts, and career missteps that made every punch M threw land even harder. The imbalance grew. M's star shot into orbit. Cannabis's star flickered in and out. What could have been a legendary lyrical rivalry between two of the game's most technical MCs turned into a one-sided grudge, fueled by disappointment, timing, and bitterness. Nonetheless, the unfortunate part of this tale is that the confrontation was unavoidable. Eminem and cannabis might have collaborated if the LL Cool J rumor had not circulated at all, if there had been a dialogue to resolve the misunderstandings, and if the record industry had not been so quick to set the rivalry between the two talented rappers. Just think about the verses. Just think about the battles. Just think about the energy. Two lyrical giants supporting each other instead of shooting at each other from opposite sides of the battlefield. However, the reality of hip-hop is that it seldom shows us the alternate scenarios we long for. Rather, it shows us the messy realities, the egos, the miscommunications, and the scars that last much longer than the music itself. Even after a long time, when both rappers had already turned the page into different stories, still, the atmosphere was still preparing for a fight. Eminem, who is famous for letting things go only after he has thoroughly roasted them in a rhyme, still managed to shoot arrows on regular occasions. Cannabis, ever the defensively minded, went on opposing his past with his legend status intact. They did not come to physical blows, but the very emotional core that fueled their feud dominated both their careers in ways that still leave the fans in doubt about the ultimate choice of one over the other today. To Eminem, cannabis was not merely a rapper who insulted him. He was the very first to make him realize that the music market could transform liking into suspicion and honor into enmity. Hence, cannabis is included in the list, not for his lyrics, not for the fights, but rather for the fact that the feud is traceable back to the time when Eminem comprehended that the rap industry was not just a competition, it was war. If you think this rapper pushed Eminem's buttons, wait until you see who he hated even more. Number 4. Ja Rule. Back in the early 2000s, hip-hop was a battlefield painted with platinum chains, booming radio hits, and egos big enough to swallow entire record labels. On one side, you had Ja Rule, radio king, hitmaker, a rapper-singer hybrid who dominated the charts with anthem after anthem. He had the swagger, the melodies, the commercial appeal, and at one point, he felt untouchable. On the other side, a storm was gathering. 50 Cent, Dr. Dre, and a rising force named Eminem. The energy was shifting. The industry could feel it. Fans could feel it. Ja Rule could definitely feel it. And somewhere between the radio dominance, street tensions, and rap politics, a spark ignited that would grow into one of the most personal grudges in Eminem's entire career. To understand why Eminem lists Ja Rule among the rappers he hated most, you have to rewind to the moment everything cracked. This wasn't just another lyrical feud. It wasn't petty competition. It wasn't two rappers trying to outshine each other on the charts. No, this was something deeper. This was betrayal, disrespect, and a war that crept into the one place Eminem never allowed anyone to touch: his family. The feud didn't even start with Eminem. It began with Ja Rule and 50 Cent, two men who had a long, tangled history of beef, broken alliances, and street-level tensions simmering beneath the surface. Before 50 ever became the global powerhouse he is today, he and Ja Rule had clashed in ways that went far beyond diss tracks. There were altercations, threats, and rivalries fueled by crews, neighborhoods, and pride. By the time 50 Cent signed with Shady/Aftermath, the line in the sand had already been drawn. Eminem, loyal, protective, fiercely tied to the people who brought him up, was automatically pulled into the feud. And for a while, he treated it like any other rap beef. Lyrical jabs, clever disses, a competitive pushback to anyone who tried stepping into his lane. But Ja Rule made one fatal mistake, one that turned everything nuclear in an instant. He mentioned Eminem's daughter. In rap, there are rules, unwritten, but carved into the culture like commandments. You can talk about a man's skills, his catalog, his persona, his style. You can clown his image, his crew, even his business decisions. But you do not, under any circumstances, mention his child. Especially when that child is a little girl. Especially when that girl belongs to a man whose entire worldview is built around protecting her. So when Ja Rule dropped a line dragging Haley into the crossfire, the feud transformed from entertainment into war. Not metaphorical war, not rap beef. A real, visceral, emotional war that hit the deepest part of Eminem's psyche. This wasn't just disrespect, it was an attack. And if you know anything about Eminem's history, his childhood, the chaos he came from, the way he clings to Haley like a lifeline, you understand why that moment became the point of no return. Eminem's response wasn't casual. It wasn't clever. It wasn't measured. It was fury on wax. He unleashed tracks that felt less like diss songs and more like demolition jobs. He tore Ja Rule apart from every angle. His voice, his image, his credibility, his entire career. It wasn't just bars. It was personal vengeance put to rhythm. And behind Eminem came the rest of the shady aftermath machine. 50 Cent dropped diss after diss. G-Unit attacked from multiple fronts. Even Dr. Dre, who rarely dipped his hands into drama, stood firmly with his camp. The hip-hop world watched as Ja Rule, once a titan of radio, became the target of a coordinated lyrical assault unlike anything rap had seen in years. Interviews, music videos, magazine covers, everywhere Eminem went, he made sure people knew just how deeply Ja Rule crossed the line. The main factor that made this feud so explosive was not only the music, but also the timing of it all. Eminem was on his way up to a level of stardom that virtually no rapper had experienced before. The Marshall Mathers LP, The Eminem Show, 8 Mile. He was invincible. The public was split into two camps, and the switching was merciless. Memes, laughter, radio presenters, late-night TV, Ja Rule suddenly became the joke of a society that used to admire him. However, for Eminem, the feud still got very personal. His aim wasn't to destroy Ja's career. It wasn't even about competition. And it wasn't even about 50 Cent. It was the betrayal of hearing his daughter's name being used as a weapon. This kind of injury does not heal over time. It remains in the bone and marrow. Years passed, and both men eventually moved on. Ja Rule refurbished his career within lesser circles. Eminem continued transforming and, thus, distancing himself from most of the old feuds. Nonetheless, if the topic is brought up in an interview, a slight crackling can still be heard in Eminem's voice, a subtle indication that some boundaries, once violated, leave permanent scars. And that's the reason why Ja Rule occupies the 4th position. Not because he was the greatest opponent, not because the songs of diss were the most memorable, but because he reached something you don't reach. And in Eminem's universe, that is what makes you unforgettable, in the most negative way possible. Number 3. Benzino. Back in the early 2000s, when hip-hop was reshaping itself into a cultural superpower and every rapper with a mic was fighting for relevance, one feud didn't just spark, it detonated. And unlike Eminem's earlier beefs, which often started in the streets or the studio, this one was born behind the polished veneer of the music industry itself. It wasn't about two MCs battling for dominance. It wasn't about personal insults or clashing styles. No, the feud between Eminem and Benzino was something far more complicated, far more bitter, and far more dangerous. It was rapper versus media, artist versus gatekeeper. A war where one man used his voice and the other used his magazine. At the center of the storm stood The Source, hip-hop's most influential publication at the time, a magazine that had the power to elevate careers or bury them in a single edition. And sitting at the helm of that empire was Benzino, a rapper turned executive who never quite found the commercial success he wanted, but wielded an entirely different kind of influence. To Benzino, he wasn't merely an artist. He was a tastemaker, a guardian of the culture, a man who believed he could decide who deserved a seat at hip-hop's table. And he made one thing abundantly clear. He did not believe Eminem belonged there. The first shot fired wasn't a diss track. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a simple star rating, a number that appeared beneath Eminem's critically acclaimed albums in the source. Despite the record-breaking sales, shifting the sound of hip-hop, and pushing lyrical boundaries, the source consistently downplayed Eminem's achievements. 4 stars, 3.5. Reviews dripping with phrases like overhyped, benefits from privilege, not authentic to the culture. For fans, it was confusing. For the industry, it was suspicious. For Eminem, it was infuriating. It didn't take long for whispers to turn into evidence. People noticed that every time Eminem soared higher, the source tried to drag him back down. And over time, the truth came out. Benzino wasn't critiquing Eminem from a place of objectivity. He was attacking him from a place of resentment. He couldn't accept that a white rapper, one who wasn't from the streets, one who didn't fit the traditional mold, had become one of the greatest MCs alive. And instead of competing in the booth, Benzino used his platform to undermine Eminem's credibility. Eminem, who had fought tooth and nail for everything he'd earned, wasn't about to let someone rewrite the narrative he built with blood, sweat, and syllables. And when Benzino escalated the feud by dropping diss tracks that called Eminem culture-stealing, industry-made, and artificial, it woke something in M he hadn't unleashed before. A fury sharpened by betrayal, targeted at a man who abused the one thing artists feared most: editorial power. When Eminem finally responded, he didn't tiptoe. He detonated. He attacked Benzino's skills, his career, his reputation, and most notably, his misuse of the source as a weapon. The diss tracks weren't just insults. They were autopsies of Benzino's credibility. The sauce and nail in the coffin tore through Benzino's persona with surgical brutality. Eminem didn't just want to win the beef. He wanted to expose the machinery behind it. And he did. Fans started questioning the source's ratings. Artists began distancing themselves from its politics. Numbers dropped. Subscriptions plunged. By going after Eminem, Benzino had accidentally gone after the heart of hip-hop itself, and the culture turned its back on him. But the war wasn't over. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Benzino published a personal bombshell, an old tape of a teenage Eminem rapping racially insensitive lines. A moment from a time when Eminem was angry, broke, and lashing out. Benzino framed it as proof. See, he's not part of our culture. He's attacking it. He wanted Eminem canceled before cancel culture even existed. But something unexpected happened. Eminem got it all. He made a public apology, showed real feelings, and did not give any reasons for his actions. He took stock of his past pipe dreams, explained them in a way that put him in a better light, and invited the world to judge him according to the values of an artist and human being he had changed to, not the mad kid he had once been. The fans approved. The culture progressed. But Benzino did not. He continued to push, continued to release insults, and continued to publish articles. And with each attack, the public attitude towards the situation moved even more. What at first seemed like a dispute now looked like an obsession. On the other hand, Eminem's career was getting bigger and bigger. The sales of the albums went up to platinum. He got awards, one after the other. His power in the industry grew. Benzino, on the other hand, became lonelier. The source was no longer credible. The advertisers withdrew. The magazine, which had been the classic in hip-hop journalism, faced slow extinction due to the very CEO's ego and revenge that had once been the source of its power. Eventually, when the dust had settled, it was one of the most lopsided battles in rap history. Not in terms of sales or skills, but because the public realized that Eminem had composed with his words while Benzino had resorted to his hatred. For Eminem, the feud still lingers deeper than most. The reason is that Benzino did not just go after his music, he went after his persona, his standing in hip-hop, the very basis M had been fighting for all those years. Benzino attempted to alter the past. Eminem made sure he wouldn't succeed. Thus, Benzino is placed at number 3, not due to the damage done by his lyrics, not because he was a real danger, but because he is the kind of opponent that Eminem detests most, the one who misuses power, distorts the truth, and tries to silence others. In the end, Eminem won the feud, but more importantly, he won the culture. And Benzino became the cautionary tale he tried to make Eminem into. If you thought this beef was intense, wait until you witness the rapper Eminem really couldn't stand. Number 2. Everlast. By the time Eminem's career began its rocket launch into the mainstream, he had already fought through years of underground battles, industry rejection, and personal demons that shaped him into the lyrical weapon he became. But somewhere in that chaotic climb, a feud ignited, quietly at first, almost accidentally, between him and a man he once admired, Everlast. What began as a simple misunderstanding spiraled into one of the most bitter, personal, and unexpectedly vicious rivalries Eminem ever engaged in. Not because Everlast was his biggest threat, not because he posed any real danger to his career, but because of the way the beef unfolded. Messy, emotional, and dripping with a sense of betrayal that M never really let go of. To understand why Everlast sits at number 2 on Eminem's list of people he genuinely hated, you have to go back to the late 90s, when Everlast experienced a second wave of fame. After leaving House of Pain, he reinvented himself with a brand new sound. Acoustic guitars, gritty vocals, blues-driven storytelling. His comeback album, Whitey Ford Sings the Blues, was a hit, especially with the single, What It's Like. For a while, Everlast was riding a critical high, an artist reborn, praised for his maturity and evolution. And somewhere in that comeback arc, he crossed paths with Eminem. There was no animosity at first. In fact, Everlast reached out during the rise of the Slim Shady LP, hoping to collaborate. But Eminem, drowning in chaos, label meetings, tour dates, endless press, never responded. To him, it was nothing personal. In the frenzy of new fame, unanswered calls were normal. But Everlast didn't see it that way. He interpreted the silence as disrespect, as a slight from a newcomer suddenly too famous to acknowledge him. That's how misunderstandings become sparks. The spark caught fire when Everlast spotted Eminem at an awards show and tried again to connect. M, distracted, preoccupied, rushed past without realizing who had called out to him. For Everlast, that moment wasn't accidental, it was confirmation. In his mind, Eminem had disrespected him twice. And in hip-hop, perceived disrespect is more than an insult, it's a challenge. Soon after, Everlast released a track that included subtle, but unmistakable, shots at Eminem. No names, no direct call-outs, just enough coded language to make people raise eyebrows. Eminem heard it. And once he realized Everlast was taking aim at him publicly, he didn't respond with confusion or negotiation. He responded with a nuclear detonation. Eminem's diss tracks toward Everlast were not casual. They were ruthless. I Remember and Quitter weren't just lyrical takedowns, they were character assassinations. Eminem mocked Everlast's career, his musical reinvention, his past, even his age. He tore through the man's persona with a level of venom that shocked even hardcore fans. And behind the bars, you could hear it. Eminem wasn't just scoring points. He was angry. Personally angry. Everlast fired back. Whitey's Revenge attempted to paint Eminem as childish, petty, and insecure. He threw in jabs about Eminem's image, his masculinity, and his upbringing. But the problem wasn't the content. It was the mismatch. Eminem was a nuclear reactor. Everlast was a campfire. No matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't match M's speed, intensity, or lyrical brutality. Still, Everlast didn't back down. he doubled down. And that's when the feud took its darkest turn. What set Eminem off wasn't the rapping, it wasn't the criticism, it wasn't the challenge. It was the moment Everlast decided to escalate the beef by dragging Eminem's family into the crossfire. Eminem had always been clear, diss him all you want, but leave Haley out of it. Yet Everlast, either miscalculating or not caring about the consequences, referenced M's daughter in a way that felt threatening, not playful, not symbolic, threatening. That was the moment the feud shifted from competitive to personal, from lyrical to emotional, from annoyance to hatred. Eminem unleashed another round of disses, this time with a venom that felt almost palpable. His voice sharpened, his tone hardened. He wasn't dissing a rival, he was punishing an enemy. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. During this time, Everlast experienced a serious heart attack. Although he lived through it, the incident was still connected to the feud in a big way. Eminem later confessed that, for a short time, he thought that perhaps the stress his diss track caused might have been a reason for the heart attack. The negative feelings were still there, but the situation became more complicated. The downloading made the dispute less explosive, more intimate, more ghostly. Even after years of the feud dying down, Eminem was still taking indirect jabs at Everlast through interviews and songs. Not because he wanted to, not because Everlast was still a factor, but because the scar was still fresh. Eminem does not erase disrespect from his memory, nor does he forget if someone metaphorically or literally threatens his child. Years later, Everlast, looking back on things, seemed to think of the feud as just a small chapter in a long career. But what about Eminem? The resentment lived on, quietly, but still there. It was like an echo of the early times when fame brought along not only success, but also adversaries, some real, some imaginary, some completely self-inflicted. And that is what puts Everlast in the second place. Not because he was the toughest opponent Eminem had, not because the dissing was such a huge part of hip-hop. The feud, however, was extremely personal and touched on a rarely seen side of Eminem, the one formed by a mixture of loyalty, trauma, and a lifelong struggle to safeguard the few whom he loves. In the end, Everlast became something more than a footnote. He became one of the few rappers Eminem truly, genuinely hated. Stay ready for our number one pick, because the level of hate there will blow your mind. Number 1. Machine Gun Kelly. Back in the 2010s, when hip-hop was shifting faster than ever, and the internet could turn a rumor into a firestorm overnight, one feud stood out from the rest. Not because it lasted long, but because of how boldly it erupted. Machine Gun Kelly became one of the only rappers in years to directly challenge Eminem at the height of his legendary status, and the fallout turned their rivalry into one of the most explosive moments in modern rap history. The story didn't begin with Rap Devil, it began in 2012, when MGK was still an emerging artist. In an interview, he tweeted about Eminem's underage daughter, calling her hot. He insisted it wasn't meant disrespectfully, but intentions didn't matter. Eminem has two unbreakable rules in hip-hop beef. Don't attack his family, and don't ever mention his daughter. MGK broke both in one sentence. Eminem didn't publicly respond. He didn't rant, tweet, or record a freestyle. Instead, he went silent, something far more dangerous. Over the years, fans noticed MGK seemed mysteriously absent from certain platforms and stations linked to Eminem. Whether by rumor or reality, MGK felt the pressure. The feud remained dormant until 2018, when tension finally boiled over. MGK fired subliminal shots. Eminem dropped cryptic lines. Fans split into teams before either rapper fully engaged. It wasn't just rap beef, it was a generational clash. Old-school technical mastery versus young rebellious energy. Subsequently, Eminem released Kamikaze, and for the first time, he pointed MGK out directly. Social media then erupted. There were so many reaction channels. Everyone kept on speculating about the rapper's reply, and he gave it Rap Devil, being the punchline that landed like a meteor. MGK took jabs at the age of Eminem, the style of his beard, and to note his whole legacy. He raised the utmost doubt about M's importance. It was a big, not very wise, and extraordinary act. However, what happened next gave the clearest picture. MGK almost immediately went from rap to pop punk, thus creating a new version of himself, but also discreetly showing the surrender of the territory he had taken over by challenging Eminem. His fans considered it a step to higher grounds. Eminem saw it as an indication. MGK triggered the lion, got bitten, and left. That is why MGK is number one. He is not so because he was the most powerful rival, but he had the courage to step into the territory that Eminem defends the most, and he got it hard. And there you have it. The 5 rappers Eminem truly hated the most. The ones who pushed his limits, tested his patience, and helped shape some of the most unforgettable moments in hip-hop history. These feuds weren't just beef. They were battles that changed careers, rewrote narratives, and left scars that still linger today. If you enjoyed diving into the hidden rivalries behind Slim Shady's rise, make sure you like this video, drop a comment with the next artist list you want uncovered, and subscribe so you never miss a deep dive like this again. And don't go anywhere. Click the video on your screen next for another explosive breakdown of the stories Hollywood and the music industry never wanted you to hear.